Let's move on then to the next part here. Around journalism, we've often stressed about just how difficult it is to have proper information about what's coming out of Gaza, about what's even happening in Gaza. Let's put this up there on the screen because this is a very significant, actually, piece of news from Semaphore. Key providers of satellite photography to news organizations and researchers have now begun to restrict imagery of Gaza after a New York Times report on Israeli tank positions that was based on the images. So the satellite image provider here is Planet Labs and a bunch of other competitors to them. They've revolutionized coverage of wars and disasters because they have commercial satellites that are up in the air that they can get real-time footage, not real-time, but maybe 24 hours or 72 hours delay to actually show exactly what has happened. And it's incredibly useful for reporting on the Syrian civil war, for the Mosul, for ISIS, and especially in Ukraine. Anybody who has been watching the Ukraine situation knows how useful these ComSat companies are.
Absolutely.
Well, the issue, though, is that for some reason, these companies are now, quote, heavily restricting and obscuring parts of images over the Gaza Strip for users, including news organizations. So it's difficult to understand exactly why the subscribers, and again, these are people who pay a premium for this product, have not had access to, quote, high-resolution imagery of Gaza since October 22nd, ever since the New York Times actually reported on Israeli tank positions. So then the question comes, is this at the behest of, like, is the company owned by an Israeli guy and he's like, hey, we're just not going to do this? Is this maybe at the request, the behest, or the order of the Israeli government? Is it the U.S. government? Because this is such like a new phenomenon in terms of commercial satellite analysis, nobody really knows in terms of the jurisdiction on what you aren't allowed, in terms of other countries to be able to look at. But I think the net effect is obvious, which is we know less about what's going on in Gaza because of this.
Yeah.
Even that Financial Times map that we used previously, that cut off at October 26th. Now we know why.
Yeah, that's
because
right.
we don't know
That's
about
exactly
what's being
right.
held and what isn't. And that previously, I think we'd brought people multiple analysis. It's like based on ComSat imagery, we can say that 25% of the buildings have been leveled. Now, and we don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know anything.
Yeah, that's an important point because actually Axios and a number of other news outlets had done a really good job of putting together, okay, here's the satellite image of this neighborhood before the Israeli airstrikes. Here is it afterwards. And since you don't have, a lot that you can get from on the ground, this was a really important way to understand the extent of the damage. And so now we really are flying blind in terms of, what is really happening on the ground. You can't even get these satellite images to get a sense of that whatsoever. And then the other piece was that it seems to have been tied directly to this New York Times report that showed some of the Israeli tank movements and locations. And it's also important to point out, like, it's not just one satellite company. There are a number of these satellite companies, and all of them seem to be effectively censoring this information at this point. So even from the air, we really can't get a sense at this now of what is actually happening on the ground. And that's before we even talk about, the situation for journalists within Gaza.
Well, why don't we get to that, actually? Because it just, again, goes to show you the shaping of the information environment is probably the single most important thing in modern warfare. And this is a clip from CNN where they describe the conditions about what it took to have one of their journalists in bed with the IDF. Let's take a listen.
Yesterday, CNN's Jeremy Diamond went into Gaza on an IDF embed. I should note that journalists embedded with the IDF in Gaza operate under the observation of Israeli commanders in the field and are not permitted to move unaccompanied within the Gaza Strip. As a condition to enter Gaza under IDF escort, outlets have to submit all materials and footage to the Israeli military for review prior to publication. CNN has agreed to these terms in order to provide a limited window into Israel's operations in Gaza.
That's as stark as it gets. Not only do you have to agree, you have to provide them with your footage, which, I was trying to think back to the early invasion of Iraq. I'm pretty sure even when U.S. troops were U.S. journalists were embedded with U.S. troops in Iraq, that there was never a condition to this effect. And I went back actually to try and to look. There was basically real-time live shots that were happening as the Humvees were rolling. And, you know, there are multiple books. A great one of them is Generation Kill, if you want to go and read it. I mean, there's not a single drop of censorship in that entire thing. And that guy rode all the way to Baghdad with the Marines. So, I mean, it just shows you, like, if they're to the extent where they're like, no, we're going to review all the footage before you even broadcast that, we're not going to allow you to go live from Gaza, that just demonstrates like the level of control that they are putting on what actually gets out of the country. It's also why they continue to cut off all this communications.
Of course.
Every time they have some sort of major military operation.
Absolutely. So you have satellite imagery mysteriously blocked. You have only certain handpicked journalists allowed to go in. And it's basically like, you know how North Korea will sometimes allow journalists to come in, but they get this like fake tour of what's going on. It's basically like that level of control over the war propaganda coming out of the Israeli side. So they pick the journalists, then they get to vet all of the footage before it gets to air. And then you have also this, you know, frequent communications, internet and cell complete blackout. So that any sort of real-time reporting of what's going on in the ground, you're just hearing rumors from like one person who happens to have like a Turkish SIM card or some way to get some sort of information out of the Gaza Strip. So, I mean, it really is astonishing. I think it also underscores not only how critical Israel sees the information war as being, but also just how much control Israel has long had over this little enclave, which, you know, they love to say, oh, we withdrew back in the 2000s, and so they were doing their own thing. But they controlled everything about the conditions of that life, what came in, what went out, how many Gazans were allowed into Israel. You know, there was only like a small percentage of Gazans who were allowed to seek cancer treatment in Israel. It was complete control over their life. And I think when you see how easily they're able to turn on and turn off the communications for this 2.2 million people in the Strip, you can see how tightly everything really was controlled the whole time.
Yeah, I think that is an excellent point. And also it gets to, you know, some of the toll that's being taken on some of the journalists who are covering this conflict. We have one clip we can put here up on the screen. I'll read from some of the top subtitles. I'll warn everybody, it's pretty disturbing if you do watch it. Here he says, here we have become victims. He says, in a matter of time, we are going one after the other. He's reporting there from the hospital. The anchor is actually crying. This is from Palestine TV. The size of this catastrophe, the crime that we are experiencing here in Gaza. He's wearing full body armor, just for context. And you can see that obviously he's breaking down. She's breaking down also as he kind of is watching everything that is happening. He says that there's no international security here at all. There's no immunity or anything at all for these shields or these helmets. This is where it's a really dramatic slogan. He says these are merely slogans that we wear, and that is all, because he's wearing press. He says they don't protect any journalists at all. So this is the dramatic moment. He just takes off his body armor and his Kevlar helmet, and he just says we're losing souls one after another. We're victims directly on live television. And he's reporting we are losing souls from one after another. That was a pretty, you know, obviously a harrowing situation to be in. And it's come after quite a few journalists actually have been killed. Branko Marchetti actually wrote about this for Jacobin, if we can put it up there on the screen. At least 36 journalists now been killed during the bombing campaign in Gaza. And in some cases, as we showed previously, the Al Jazeera reporter, some families of these journalists have been killed as well, with many of them finding out on live television. And the, quote, media establishment, which a short time ago was rightly decrying the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, hasn't said a thing. And so, I mean, this is where I'll just return to something we were talking about a little bit, Krystal. One of the reasons why I reject most moral campaigns outright is because almost no person can be 100% consistent. And so when you try and exert U.S. power based on quote-unquote moral terms, like in, I don't know, Ukraine, and then you don't do anything whenever somebody does the exact same thing whenever it's your ally, like in Yemen or in Israel, well, then you look like an idiot. So it's better to just be honest about things from day one, which, you know, look, the Jamal Khashoggi thing, they only cared because it was Trump who was the president and Jared Kushner. And then Biden becomes the president and goes and fist bumps MBS, and they don't say anything because it's all fake. It's all just theater that they want everybody to indulge in. So it would actually be better if people were honest about their critiques, about what they were doing. But, you know, if that were true, then I guess we wouldn't even have jobs as journalists. So I'm not sure what the point is.
Yeah, I mean, in this period following October 7th, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, more reporters have been killed in this period than any conflict that they've kept track of since 1992. For Reporters Without Borders, it's the deadliest conflict for reporters since the start of the 21st century, outdoing the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Ukraine, with Israeli forces killing more journalists in a matter of weeks than they had slain over the entire period from 2000 to last year. You've also seen a direct targeting of 50 different media outlets in terms of partial or total destruction of the premises, like of where their offices are, according to also to Reporters Without Borders, in a complaint that they filed with the International Criminal Court claiming that Israel's killing of journalists constitute war crimes. So again, to lay out the situation here, you've got satellite imagery blocked. You've got communications frequently blocked, especially during the most intense time periods. And then you have journalists that are targeted. There was actually a journalist's family that was killed in Lebanon where she told her kids to play by the car so that the Israelis could see that these were, you know, that these were children. And the car was blown up and they were killed in Lebanon. So the other effort that you see is because there are mostly only Palestinians who are in Gaza at this point. You know, the very little in terms of international press allowed in, except unless you're CNN and you have to like submit your report before you put it on air. There's also an effort to claim, well, these aren't really journalists. They don't really count because they're Palestinian as well, to try to, you know, undermine the extent of the number of people who have been killed here. So yeah, complete silence from, you know, Biden and all these people who, when it was Trump and he was berating the press or whatever, Jim Acosta, remember that whole saga?
Yes.
Saagar, and they were so up at arms, oh my God, the freedom of the press and journalism, and it's so important, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we've always knew they were full of it because they didn't care about Julian Assange, right? How about that? And then with Jamal Khashoggi, same thing. There was a big show of this. Biden says on the campaign trail, like, we're going to make Saudi Arabia a pariah. Okay, how did that work out? And now you have the most journalists killed in a single conflict since it's been tracked, and total crickets. So yeah, Blinken got asked about this actually. And he did a just like little waxing poetic about the importance of journalism and then just kept it, well, I haven't really heard about those reports, and just kept it moving along.
Yeah,
so
well,
it just shows you how full of it they've always been.
Par for the course, I think.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.